we're going to have on stage the amazing opening keynote that we have lined up for you today. And this keynote is an actual rock star. I'm not kidding. He is an actual rock star. He is actually the founder of one of the most successful Israeli metal bands of all time, Orphaned Land, and he invented a new musical genre called Oriental Metal. He is a really amazing speaker and a rock star, like I mentioned, an actual rock star. He is the proud father of at least one daughter that I know about, and I hope you have more daughters than one?
Yeah, three,
okay.
actually.
Okay, 3 daughters. That's amazing. I just only met the one. So he is the proud father of 3 daughters, and he's also the father of something that is called the bouzouki tara. Now, if you're curious like me, what the hell is a bouzouki tara? It's a bouzouki, an Oriental musical instrument, for lack of a better term, and a guitar. So the bouzouki tara. Please help me, everybody that is here in the room, to welcome to the stage the amazing Yossi Sassi. Applause! Yossi, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Just a second. We'll get this sorted.
And of course, during the day, things may not go as amazingly smooth as we always want them to go, but we're going to be working very hard to make it all work as amazing as we can. Thank you for spending your day with us. Yossi, are we ready?
Yes, I think we are.
Amazing. Don't forget to sanitize your hands.
Yeah, sure.
It's very important to sanitize hands. And as you can see, I'm keeping my distance. Yossi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much, everybody here and everybody at home. Hello. Hope you're cozy. You have your favorite drink set next to your laptop. Very happy to be back in BsidesTLV this year as well. I'm going to talk with you in this almost afternoon opening keynote. I'm going to talk to you a bit about some topics that in some of them I'm really far from being an expert, which is privacy and things like that. Much greater people have spoken about this in the past, but I want to touch a bit more in depth about who are we anyway in this generation, and to touch about topics such as deception, attribution, false flags, etc., which are things that I can actually really comment about from my personal experience. But first, things first.
Who are you?
Who is but the form following the function of what, and what I am is a man in a mask.
Well, I can see that.
Of course you can. I'm not questioning your powers of observation. I'm merely remarking upon the paradox of asking a masked man who he is.
Oh, right.
Well, arguably, maybe not Natalie Portman's best performance, but of course this classic scene from V for Vendetta really sets the tone for the things we are talking about this morning. And this is identities. Identities are the new perimeters. Actually, we've even evolved since this sentence, but we know we've made a long way from the perimeter, the classic perimeter security, and identities cross perimeters. And today, ironically, it's very easy to repudiate actions, but it can be also very, very hard to achieve non-repudiation, and we'll speak about this pendulum effect. So we'll talk about a bit, really in a nutshell, about the challenges that we have today in security at the foundations, essentially why we got here in the first place. And we'll speak about the challenges in privacy, deception, and attribution. So who am I? Well, I'm not questioning your powers of observation. I'm merely remarking the paradox of asking a man with a bouzouki who he is. So I am the mother of bouzouki tara. There is also a father, but I invested a bit more in the upbringing of this instrument, including conceiving it. Co-founder of Orphaned, ex-member of the group till quite recently, and all other musical endeavors. Also been practicing guitar playing and hacking quite a while. It's been 33 years by now. Programming, communication protocols, etc. I'm also doing information security research, especially on bypass of operating system and living off the land hacks, and doing red team training in 4 continents around the world for military, banks, and governments, NATO, etc. I'm also the co-founder at Tenroot Cybersecurity. We're a small, fun team. We hack for good, meaning that you have to pay us to hack you, and we'll get less than we could have in Bitcoin, and we'll pay the taxes, but it's fun to have good values. I had an episode in late 90s, early 2000s when I was working for Microsoft, coding tools for Windows Server. So basically, this was the time that I was, I think, the only employee that had a Lilo dual boot with a Linux machine in Microsoft. I couldn't say it out loud because Steve Ballmer used to call Linux a cancer at those days. I think they destroyed that video. But it's really amazing to see Microsoft hugging open source today. That's such a blissful move and change of tone. Sometimes it feels like it's more like a bear hugs you, but still it's a hug. So it's something warm. And I made the trip from Atari through Apple IIc, OpenVMS, etc., Linux, Windows, and back to industrial control systems. So in a way, from Atari to SCADA, I kind of did the trip back to systems from 80s. And I'm the guy that gets a lot of calls in incident response, Hacktive Directory, a term I coined. PowerShell go-to guy, and I was privileged enough to be part of Javelin Networks, ex-Israeli Air Force Intelligence Corps company that was sold in late 2018 to Symantec, and today we have actually 3 talks with Javelin X, so that's nice. This is what people think I'm doing, especially my family. If I speak to them, I'm saying I'm a hacker, that's what they think I'm doing. That's what I was really doing for many years. As Karen mentioned, I'm a proud father. My eldest is almost 19, Danielle, and she's coding very well in Python, and she already did her first hack or two under my ethical surveillance. But this is what I'm really doing. So I read a lot of Winnie the Pooh stories back in the day to my 3 daughters. By the way, there's a nice joke here from, in Hebrew it says, stories from a forest by hackers. Really, that's what this cover says on this famous A.A. Millan story. I looked it up, and apparently it's stories from the 100-acre forest. So even before Google Translate, we had the translation glitches. And last thing about how geek I am, last year we moved apartment, I XML tagged the boxes. This is how geek I am, and I saw it only in retrospect, so next time I'm going to JSON them. Okay, so I think all information security challenges today really can be traced back to the design goals and the core design mindset of the Internet Protocol suites. You see, security, privacy, non-repudiation, confidentiality, spoofing, all this was never in the mindset of the late 60s and early 70s when TCP/IP and all this started. The purpose was more to survive after a partial subset of failure and basically connect multiple networks to a single one. And security is just a patch. It's a Band-Aid that we've added along the years later on. And that's something that you feel until today. And really it feels that in many things we haven't made any progress at all. You can't blame those guys. This was, I'm reminding you that late 60s was Woodstock and stuff like that. Nobody thought about, it was way before September 11th or thing like that. Humanity was in a high mood. But yes, security was totally forgotten from the table and had to be patched later. But we have made progress since then. We have made progress in general in computing. For example, we used to have in computers buttons that can actually slow down your computer. That's right. There are a few people here in the room and probably also at home that remember there was a time in humanity that you had a button that you could say to your computer, I don't need so much performance. I need you to slow down because my application is not running well. So you can actually turn it down. We made a lot of progress. We also made progress in terms of pop-ups and all kinds of messages. I love this tweet by Rob Graham regarding this Internet Explorer box about a security alert. With a really nice informative alert and button there that you're about to engage with an SSL TLS connection. Only you and the server are going to be able to see what you're doing, and you have to approve that. So. But at the end of the day, what do you need? I'm asking you, really, come on, what do you need in life? Of course, I dropped out of high school to practice hacking and music, so But later, I completed 2 or 3 degrees with distinction, and I learned about the Maslows Pyramid of Needs. And the Maslows Pyramid of Needs, which I'm guessing you probably heard about or know about, it goes between the basic needs that you need, right, the physical needs, and all the way up to self-realization, self-actualization. I don't know if you've heard, but lately they've updated this pyramid and added 2 more layers to it. Apparently today, you first need a battery, then a Wi-Fi connection, and then your physical needs maybe perhaps can be addressed, to take a shower or something. And although this is semi-funny, this is, kind of an infographic about what cyber really is, because we used to be people and computers, right? Back in the late 80s or in the 90s, we used to work with computers, but when we didn't touch them, we weren't connected to anything. And today you wake up in the morning and you've touched 4, 5, 6 computers and you've been analyzed or been recorded by a dozen others. And today this fabric of hardware, essentially just, stuff and code, which is text, just text. Who wrote that text? Did you write this text? Did you write this text? Did I write this text? Trust me, I'm a hacker. What can go wrong? And people are actually collaborating. So in this very thin line between people and text and hardware, we are existing. The hopes given to computers were quite early being criterialized with, this is a quote from Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich, quite a controversial and colorful rest in peace character that we've had. This is from a cover from a book in the 60s, quite around the time that TCP/IP design and everything emerged. And from a computer science book, Computer Information Systems, it says the hopes we're putting on the computer are very exaggerated. It doesn't release the person from thinking, but from calculating, computing. And it certainly doesn't release it from the necessity to reach a decision and make it up and follow it. And that's an interesting quote, because today to say it out loud on stage, it really sounds very naive, but that's something that really a lot of people felt strongly about. And when we think about the lack of security and privacy in the design, there are many, many examples to show that, right? So to start off, of course, none of us are really anonymous, of course, in private browsing, right? So if we, just every website that you browse to, this is one of my servers, but of course, this is a very simple PHP code, server side even, so you're sending everything to that server, your local port, a lot of things, your user agent, and of course this can be changed, right? You can actually manipulate your user agent, so this thing works two ways. So by default, of course, nobody is anonymous in anything. And then of course there is a set of tools that can help you to get a bit more private, right? There are proxies and VPNs, aka glorified proxies, and there is Tor, and there is Unix that you can also drive with that Unix and 2 VMs throughout a neighborhood and change Wi-Fis. So there are levels of anonymity that you can achieve. But then again, to really escape the fact to be discovered, you really need to take into account metadata. And metadata is a huge thing. Metadata, even when you're encrypting everything, your WhatsApp, your calls, and you're in VPN, etc., there is still this metadata. And metadata counts, it matters, because it tells a story about you. It's the junction where pieces of information are collected, and it's not necessarily a right story, by the way. The fact that my cell phone was in the same cell tower triangulation in a certain time of the day with a criminal doesn't mean that I was meeting with that criminal, but certainly can tell a lot of stories about you from this metadata. So 101 privacy is that anonymity and privacy are not the same thing. Right? When privacy is a basic thing that we all strive for and we all deserve, it's embedded in the laws of every modern society and democracy. You have the perfect right to do what you want in your 4 walls, to dance naked or whatever. Anonymity is something a bit different. It's also legitimate for many needs. If you're doing a friendly whistleblowing, exposing corruptions, if you're a journalist, for the sake of democracy from dark regimes and dictatorships. But you can also do some things that hurt other people or are criminal crimes when you're anonymous. So it's definitely not the same thing. What we see clearly is that the request for legitimate privacy from individuals is, of course, all the time colliding and interfering with law enforcement and national security. And now we see it even more than ever with the last stride on global health. So you see COVID-19 and what that's bringing. So people speaking about from Bluetooth bracelets to, of course, the cell phone, that cell tower triangulations, and you know, it's still open to even more things that will come. Speaking about identifying people and the lack of identity, sometimes technology comes for the greater good to do some nice things. For example, in this nice research, they've done an X model from identifying people behind a wall. You can identify somebody through the wall from a candidate video. So you take a candidate, and all you need is Wi-Fi. It's 2 antennas, one transmitting, other receiving. Apparently, our gestures, our body gestures, our movements are unique to us and can identify us in a very high rate, more than 80% success rate. And you take a candidate video, you build a 3D mesh, a model from the movements of those people. Of course, you convert it to the right model in the returns, the send and returns of the waves behind that wall, and you can actually identify people. And this leads us to one of the most challenging problems, to find out who did what. And the challenge of attribution is just getting more and more evident and very hard to figure out. Attribution essentially is proving the source of an attack, the source of the guy doing the things. And you know, with the time, forensic analysts really developed it to a whole bunch of best practices and a lot of methodologies to really determine the source of actions, you know, by using means like code and clues in the code and the infrastructure connections and political motivations, what's going on in the actual life of that nation state, etc. Many companies do this code attribution or guessing attributions from the code itself, infrastructure, etc., like Intezer and many other companies. And you can see this, sometimes it's fairly easy, right? If I'm giving you this attribution challenge, you will solve it very quickly. Like, for example, if you can tell me who wrote this piece of malware, if I'm taking in one part of this malware, is, as you see, is this call get user default language ID, and you see there is a condition check. If the result is somewhere in the Russian Federation, then abort, exit process. So clearly what we can assume from that is, of course, that this is Russian malware. It's designed, and it has, in the very beginning of the payload, a very specific check that if you've infected the Russian machine, you just need to exit this process. And you can also infect with a bit more advanced payloads. You can use obfuscation, string manipulations, polymorphic malwares, etc. And you can also use ZeroDays. And ZeroDays, either you find, which is, it takes some time, but you can find, researchers find it and they report it. Companies find and report, academy find and report. Many people find and they don't report. They don't report either because, you know, their own special interest, but can be also a nation state or intelligence agency, etc. But there are stock markets for exchanging ZeroDays. One of the more known ones is ZeroDium, which is totally anonymous sellers and buyers. So in ZeroDium, you can actually sell, of course, zero-day exploits that actually make you do things by bypassing a lot of the design, the core architecture of that product, remote code execution, local privilege escalations, zero-click, etc. And the payouts are also very good. So you can sell and buy anonymously to everyone. So you can actually be an Iranian guy and you can sell a zero-day to the Mossad, and you can sell it to the Americans, and you can sell it to a Mexican crime conglomerate, and you'll never know that you actually did that. And you can also sell it to your own country without knowing that you did that. And speaking about nation states, of course, any organizations can and will be hacked. Breaches are inevitable, period. We know that as hackers, right? That's what we do all day. We have 100% success rate. All it takes to hack any organization in the world is motivation and time. And in motivation, we put ideology and money and all kinds of resources, right? Industrial espionages from those or the other, CIA, NSA, NASA, and the list goes on and on. And what happens when this type of nation state gets hacked, or what happens when they use 0 days in the public. So this can happen, for example. When you get exposed using a 0 day as a nation state, for example, so this is a real explanation from the White House site. It's called process transparency. Because after following a set of events, set of breaches, NSA, CIA, etc., Vault 7, shadow brokers, etc., so the American regime had to explain a bit. And what this essentially says is that if the United States of America finds a 0 day vulnerability in one of its dozens of three-letter acronym agencies, it will not disclose it to Microsoft or Adobe or even to American companies, because the need for national security exceeds the need of those commercial companies. And, but we saw it also balancing, for example, in CV 2020-0601, the notorious crypto API spoof in January 2020. We saw the NSA actually giving to Microsoft, working with them to expose this fix. I have a calculated guess why they did that, and I don't think it's the blue eyes of anybody. But the classic dimensions of war are totally shifting. I believe and hope that also my colleague Chris Kubeka will speak about that later in the closing keynote. And cyber as a fifth dimension of war really changes everything. So these carriers that we saw doing wonders and dominating the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan are really, really far from what's happening today. Today we are at war. We are at war in multiple fronts, but it's a very silent war. And digital arms are simply, they are weapons, like anything else. It's actually a very useful weapon. It has a very low signature. It travels many miles in a matter of seconds. It doesn't have to, it's not manned. It doesn't have to risk human lives unnecessarily. But it's a two-way street. So if you get an airplane of some country, or you get bombshells, just the debris, you can't do a lot with that when you get hit by your adversary. But when you get a malware and you capture it in an air-gapped network or in a base or on a water facility, you can reverse engineer it, and then you can learn everything about your opponent. You can learn about his modus operandi, about his IP. Actually, the intellectual property that they have in this malware, you can use it against your opponent. You can actually alter it and even enhance it, etc., etc. So it's really challenging. And the fact that we see with identities and attribution, etc., is that it's getting worse, because we see for quite some years now clear evidence of false flag in cyber. False flag like we used to have in pirates back in the day. They used to approach ships in open sea with a friendly flag, like of Spain or some other kingdom of explorers. And then when they were close enough, they would reveal their identity. But in cyber, we see false flag using other people's malware or pieces of code, or just modifying and spoofing headers of files, etc., just to appear as if you're coming from another nation state. We have very known cases like the Pyongyang Olympics, the Olympic destroyer malware. Essentially thought for a long time that it was done by North Korea, and actually was in a very thorough and rigorous step, was linked in very high percent to Russia. And speaking about Russia, we saw also in the last year some evidence exposed allegedly that Russia was using Turla, essentially a Russian group, hijacked tools from Iranian unit, oil rig, and to lead attack on. It's a nice concept. It's a very mature concept. It had the use of honeypots for a long time, which is quite obsolete in a way. But today, honeypots are just lures, they are just traps. It's very easy to plant them, but it's also very easy to find them. As seasoned hackers, we find a large percent of honeypots in the customer environment when we come in engagement. It's very easy to recognize them. Multiple computers pointing to the same IP and injecting Elsa's credentials without a logon server. It's very, very easy to recognize them, so we need to take deception to the next level. So deception can be used also two-way. Everything in cyber is two-way. Deception can be used by malware to evade defenses, obfuscations, etc. And defenders can also use deception to deter adversaries and actually hide, mask the real assets. And that's what we did in Javelin networks. In Javelin networks, we saw first of all that it's very easy to bypass honeypots, right? Deception really needs to go to the next level. The other thing we saw is that Active Directory, this rock star of Microsoft internal IT networks, is involved in almost every APT around the world. And every APT that you research, doesn't matter who found out and explored that malware, so it has an AD enumeration and credential theft inside of it. And so we took the steps to do an evolution in assets deception and did an in-memory total adversary perception control by using hooks, user mode hooks, injections inside the memory for each and every process. Luckily for all of you today, the person speaking after me is Omer Yair, the endpoint security lead from Javelin, also then Symantec, then Broadcom. And he's the #1 guy to this topic, and he will take you from zero to nation state in 25 minutes about how we did that. But in a nutshell, we basically controlled the perception by just in every API, every protocol, doesn't matter what you query about users, computers, group memberships, service principal names, SQL instances, whatever, then we mask it once we inject to the code into the memory. So we give you 10 times multiple quality fakes. There is an NLP engine that learns the customer environment, all the prefix, suffix with dictionaries, etc. And we add some bat wings to it, not bats from Wuhan, but really kosher bats. And we mix this all together and we do our magic. By the way, somewhere here there's also a decoy admin, a real admin, not an injected Elsas credential, but it's a real user, but it's a decoy user with regular permissions that appears to be a domain admin, and you get high fidelity alerts, true, false, positive, true, positive alerts on that. So we can use different controls, of course, to detect malicious activities, the preventive, deterrent, detective, confirming, etc. But what about using prevention through deterrent control? So we can actually prevent malware from making progress on the endpoint itself, and use it as a deterrent control, right? So for example, that's the thing that, for example, the guys in Minerva are doing. So in Minerva, they're also using ROP and other kinds of user mode hooks in memory. If you remember this example, I showed you a couple of slides earlier about the default language user ID. So a malware comes in and asks, am I running a Russian language OS? So then in that point, this call will be intercepted, and the answer will come back, yes. So if you answer in memory to that malware that, yes, you are running a language, Russian language OS, but actually you're running a Hebrew or whatever OS, then you can actually trick the malware in memory to use its abort built-in function. Look at it, it's a real-time memory hooking, yes? It's something that happens in real time, very fast. It's more fast than the operating system itself. So in that mechanism of deception, Minerva also uses sometimes some delays in the algorithm, so the malware will appear it's real, that you actually access the disks or you did something and things didn't happen in memory. So that's the deterrent prevention there. And think about this. When you think about Stuxnet, right? The Stuxnet worm was something totally autonomous. It had a wide tree with a branch of decisions. And think about that. If the guys there would have something like that, and it will infect a SCADA machine, it will infect the PC connected to the PLC, etc., then the first things that the malware, if you saw Stuxnet code, and I, of course, like many others, also have revisions of it on my machine. So you see that it's actually probing, it's asking some questions. It wants to know if it got to Natanz, the Iranian nuclear facility. Are these Siemens PLCs? Are these PLCs from a specific frequency converter? Because they don't want to attack power plants in the US, etc. So with this mechanism in place, you can actually say, no, there is no Siemens PLC, no, you're not in Natanz, and then it will just simply abort tens of millions of dollars of multinational allegedly operation. Or in other words, these are not the droids you're looking for. So, we don't know what COVID-19 will bring. You know, like I said, the cell tower triangulation, Trojan apps in your cell phones, new types of passports embedded in our body, I'm not sure. But I do know that everything works in a pendulum, in life in general and in cyber in particular, and everything comes back to us. And the real dilemma here is that unlike September 11th, that you know, was used, the fear after this terror wave was used to put acts like the Patriot Act and to run rules and laws that invaded privacy more than ever. I'm sure that this will bring its own wave of hurting privacy around the world. It's already happening, but this time it's a real dilemma because it's our health. It's not something like terror happening in another country, and it's like perceived at least as a global pandemic, and that's a challenging thing to wait to be seen. So key takeaways from my morning / almost afternoon opening keynote. It's very challenging to both correlate actions to entities as well as to maintain some basic privacy today, although you can get a very high level of privacy, but still you probably forgot some metadata, or you forgot to the fact you opened the file while you were browsing in your perfect privacy world, etc. The pendulum effect in this cat and mouse stuff, race between parties, so all things cyber are two ways, right? Privacy, attribution, deception, false flags. We've seen, I hope I got you a chance to get a glimpse from this huge iceberg of hunting around identities, and to understand that honestly, truly, no cyber attack can really ever be traced fully to its source. We can have very good clues. Chinese source code is a bit more evident than others, perhaps. But still, it's a matter of really a huge guessing game. It sometimes is a very good guess, but it's still a guessing game. And biggest challenges are still yet to be seen. We've started with this quote from Professor Yossi Leibovich. Computers don't release us from thinking, but from computing, from calculating. And, you know, computers are really good in answers. I argue that people are still, at least for the time being, not always, but we're still good in asking questions. And I think we still have a thing or two to offer instead of the machines. Maybe there is a computer somewhere around the world that disagrees with me, so I invite him to email me or send me some beacon. But really, when you go out of here or later in the day, you think about what you have in your pocket, you know, your cell phone. So ask yourself, you know, what do you have in your pocket? Is it a thinker or a computer? Because it's certainly not a camera with benefit, as it tries to tell you all the time. T. Hanks, everybody. See you later.